On the Hard Rocker Sports Network from KTEC 91.3, this is Hard Rocker Huddle, your podcast home for South Dakota Mines athletics.
My name is Josh Van Valkenburg-Gernert. Welcome to the 24th episode of the Hard Rocker Huddle. Today my guest is Associate AD for Internal Operations, Cassie Kosiba. Thanks for joining us today. Just kind of getting right to it. You grew up in small-town Minnesota. What was that kind of like growing up there, and what was, your family life like? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here. I grew up in Spring Grove, a real small Norwegian community. And yes, I am Norwegian. My maiden name is Glassrud, but one of the rare non-blonde Norwegians. I have a little German in me. But Spring Grove was, a population of just over 1,000 people. I throughout the years, would joke around with anyone that, I had 45 people in my graduating class, and 4 or 5 of them were foreign exchange students. So really small town. Grew up, went to school in a building that was K through 12, so went to the same school through my entire youth education, and really did everything with the same group of people. We all played the same sports. We were all in band. We were all in music and choir, and we all are in the plays to a certain extent. So a really neat community. Again, I mentioned a Norwegian community. We just celebrated Sitten Mai, which is the 17th of May, and a strong Norwegian heritage celebration. So each year, my hometown would celebrate that. They'd have a queen and a parade and all of those things. So that's just a little insight into kind of how I grew up.
Sure, and then you were pretty much there until you went off to college then?
Correct.
Okay. Just jumping back a little bit, what kind of initially, I guess, drew you into sports? Was it, just being in a small town, trying to find something to do? Was it your parents? Yeah,
so a little of both. Yes, in a small town like that, everybody does everything because there's only so many students to go around. My father is a teacher, an elementary teacher, and a football coach and basketball coach. He had 4 daughters, so eventually he passed on the football coaching and just really focused on basketball. I'm the youngest of 4, and so I grew up watching my sisters play. And again, because he coached basketball, that was all of our primary sport. But as well, we dabbled in some volleyball and softball and those things too. But I grew up in the gym. He would be at practice, and so I would be there watching my sisters practice, and I would be there. As soon as I was old enough to jump into drills, I was jumping into drills. So still probably 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I was running drills with the junior varsity and varsity teams. So it's just what I grew up experiencing, and I saw my older sisters doing it, and so I wanted to do it. And it kept me busy, and I loved it. And again, it was never a forced issue from our father. It was just something that we loved doing and loved sharing with him.
Sure, and you mentioned kind of dabbling in volleyball and some other sports a little bit. Were you pretty much a multi-sport athlete all the way through high school, or what? Obviously, having your father was such a good basketball background, but what kind of made you realize that basketball was the sport that you wanted to focus on?
Great question. So short answer, yes, I dabbled in softball and volleyball and basketball. I dropped softball, I think, at the end of my 8th grade year, primarily because at that point and this was kind of early in the AAU years, but a group had reached out to me from Rochester to see about whether I wanted to play some AAU, and so softball and AAU really started to conflict. But I did play volleyball and basketball throughout my high school careers, and realistically, I had been playing basketball longer. I was passionate about it, so that just was a natural first for me. But really loved the variety that volleyball offered. I always kind of say that basketball is my serious sport and volleyball was my fun sport. Obviously, I had a lot of fun playing basketball, and I don't want to make it seem like volleyball isn't serious as well. For me, it was just kind of a more social sport. and I filled a variety of roles. I wasn't exceptional in any way. I was just a really great teammate in that sport, and just again provided that balance and break, especially once I started playing basketball a little bit more year round. That fall season was a great break for me to step away from basketball and then come back to it really excited and passionate for the season.
Sure, so you didn't have kind of a burnout, which a lot of kids who play those two sports, especially with club mixed in, does happen with kids.
Yes. And again, when I was playing club volleyball, again, I'm sure that it existed, but it wasn't on my radar, and it definitely wasn't on the radar of anyone in the southern Minnesota area. Basketball was really kind of the priority at that point.
Sure, and what kind, while you were playing basketball, volleyball in high school, what kind of success did you have, individually as a team? Were there any, section title runs, state tournament runs?
Well, that's a sore subject. We had a lot of success, and we were in the smallest class, obviously, in the Minnesota High School League. I started playing high school basketball as an 8th grader. To be honest, I was on the JV. So again, being in a K through 12 school, you interact with everybody. You see everybody throughout the grades. I was on the JV to start the season and was dressing varsity. I remember my dad telling me this story. Of course, I didn't experience it firsthand, but a couple of his seniors and juniors had come to him to say, "Why isn't Cassie playing on the varsity?" And of course, he was conscious of the perception as the coach and father that if I was playing, it would be favoritism, or he's only playing me because I was his daughter. But the fact that his captains and upperclassmen had come and said, "We want her to play," kind of gave him the support, I guess, that he maybe needed to start doing that. And so then I was playing full-time on varsity. And again, we had great success. We, throughout my 5 years on varsity. Wasn't a math major, but I got that one right. We won, I guess we won section championships. In Minnesota, it goes section, subsection, and then state. And the furthest we got, which I believe was my senior year, we got to subsection championship game. And again, the way that things are set up in Minnesota, you play at your local high schools for a couple games, and then you get to Rochester, location of Mayo Clinic, and you get to play in those facilities, which are amazing. It's a fun experience. All the small towns, everyone, they shut down school, everyone buses up. It's an awesome experience, and we had great support for girls basketball at that time in the late 90s, and so my senior year, we were in the subsection championship game against Chatfield, which is a good maybe 45, 50 minutes up the road, just outside of Rochester. And I can't tell you who were the favorites. We may have been the favorite going into it. They were a good team. Obviously, they'd gotten this far. They were not a three-point shooting team, but they shot the lights out that game. I think they made more. I think my dad's version, anyways, they made more threes in that game than they may have made all season. And it took us out, so we had these high hopes. I had an amazing group of classmates that I played with. We were, as I referenced earlier on, we had maybe 45 students. We were probably 60% female, maybe 75. There was a lot of girls and not a lot of guys in my class. And so we excelled because we challenged each other. And so there were probably, by senior year, there were still, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 of us that were on the team and really starting and first person off the bench, all of those things. And we lost, and it was disappointing, but really looking back, can't complain. We just had a lot of success and great support, a community that supported not only our men's teams, but our women's teams as well.
Yeah, Minnesota doesn't get a lot of credit for being a basketball state because it's known as a hockey. There is a lot of basketball and a lot of really good basketball in Minnesota.
It really is, and having been in coaching after, college, and Minnesota is, and it took a while, but Minnesota is very actively recruited right now. You used to see that the athletes from Minnesota stayed more local. They did Division III schools, Division II schools. They would stay regionally because we only have that one Division I school in the University of Minnesota. But now, and it may have started just around my time, that you saw Minnesota female athletes in particular start to leave the state to go to other Division I schools. So definitely a hot spot for girls basketball.
Yeah, and even, it's even high-level schools now. You have Paige Beckers, and even on the men's side, too, like kids going to Duke and kids going to North Carolina. So it's really become a hotbed.
It really has.
Kind of going into, I guess, your initial stages of your college career, you went to a prep school right away, right off the bat, correct?
Correct.
What was kind of, for people who maybe aren't familiar with what a prep school is, or it's basically like, just kind of explain what, the difference between a prep school. It's kind of like a gap year, but it's not really a gap year, so you just kind of want to explain the process.
Yep. So obviously, your senior year, we didn't, back then we didn't really start thinking about it as a junior as much yet. But, I wanted to play college basketball. I knew that. And so, going through the process of where that might be. I had an older sister that went to Carleton. So that was in the mix. But, I was attending camps. I was playing AAU. So, you're traveling. We traveled, during my AAU days. I was fortunate to be on some really good teams early in my 14s and 15s in particular. So we traveled to Utah and to Arizona and to Louisiana, and then more regional as well. So those coaches are sending you, just like they do now, they're sending not as many emails, but they're sending letters and things like that. So I was taking those in. I was New York University seemed really exciting because it was far away and it was a great academic school. And I had gotten a letter from the Coast Guard Academy, and that was my first real experience of any of the academies, and I was like, well, that's interesting. So then I started to look into the other ones, and then attended a camp where the Air Force Academy was there, and so I'd gotten some contact from them as well, and that really intrigued me. I had thought a little bit about the potential of flying planes. Again, my father is a veteran and served in the Army, but didn't grow up as in a military family per se. But was just intrigued by the discipline and the a success both as an athlete, as a person, potential career afterward. So I looked into it. The process of receiving a nomination from a representative or senator, went through that process. Wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. To be honest, my test scores were a little bit low, and so what they'll do is that the Air Force Prep School in particular will use that as, like you said, that gap year, an extra year to just get some additional academic work. They also have a team that plays against junior college, community college, NAIA schools, so they have their own season. So when I received my nomination, but then they wanted to kind of almost waitlist you, right? Hey, we want you to come to the academy, but you're not quite where you need to be. So it really wasn't too much of a decision. I figured, what if I were to say no? Will I regret not taking the opportunity? And so committed to that, and was a really great experience. It's for those that know the academies whatsoever, that the prep school in particular, and again, I can only speak to the Air Force, but I'm sure the others have something similar, was we still had, we still were wearing the uniforms. We just had a smaller version of basic training. We had the same expectations, just on a little bit smaller scale. We had a few more, we got more privileges early on, that what they do throughout the course of maybe 1 or 2 years at the academy from earning your privileges and your abilities, they did over the course of 1 year. And so had a great time. It's, lived there, played basketball, took classes, all of those things. Got up to the big campus, the academy, frequently. And then at the end of that, had earned my spot to join the academy the next year.
Yeah, what was it like being part of the academy? Did you get some playing time while you were there? I know that's a D1, maybe not quite to the success they have now, but what was it kind of like getting that? I guess in a way it's kind of similar to here, where here it's academic based and there it's all these other things. It's training and doing everything else. Right.
So that summer after the prep school, in June, you report for basic training, and you spend, I can't remember the exact breakdown. I think it's a 6-week total, so maybe it's 3 weeks, kind of in the kind of more outdoors. I won't say camping, but camping's the word that's coming to mind right now. You're in tents, you're out more remote, and then you finish with, I believe it was 3 weeks, like in the main campus, in your dorms, getting ready for the start of the academic year. And so really, you're not touching a ball during that time. You're not putting on t-shirt and shorts or tank tops or anything. You're in your fatigues. You're in your dress uniform, depending on the day and where you are. You're running in your boots, and they're kind of breaking you down to then build you up again. And again, it was hard. It was challenging, but I enjoyed it. And it was, you saw your classmates, your squad mates struggle. And again, at that time, there were maybe in our squad, which I want to say is maybe 20 or 30 in terms of freshmen. But there were maybe 4 or 5 females. And so just kind of being a great teammate and helping them through that. And, but then once the academic year starts, now you have a little less of that sort of training. And obviously you've got your classes during the day, and then in the afternoon you've got your squad training as well as your athletic training. And as you referenced, it had just moved to Division I a couple years ahead of before that, which, to be honest, is part of the reason I was like, this is exciting, a chance to play Division I. I didn't have any other Division I offers. And so that was exciting. And so some of that training time was supplemented with the basketball. I unfortunately I had notoriously bad ankles even during my high school career. And so had a pretty good sprain early in my time there that really kept me from ever getting back and onto the court with them. And I was at the academy for a brief time anyway. But an experience I would never change, even though I ended up leaving. Best experience ever. I grew up a lot. I was the youngest in my family. I found a lot of success academically, athletically, and it challenged me. It challenged me to grow up. My sisters would tell me I was a fairly emotional kid. As when I didn't win, I was crying, and you know what? They trained the cry out of me a little bit. And my sisters will say that I'm dead inside now, but that's okay. One funny story I do, one of my favorite stories from my time at the academy is that we'll have training days or training weekends. And so within each squad, the upperclassmen are responsible for, kind of doing whatever they want to do for that training session. And so I think it was a Friday night, again, in the fall, fairly early in the academic year. And they yelling and screaming, they call everybody out, and they turn the lights off in the hallways, just like the emergency lights or the fire lights or whatever, evacuation lights. And then they get us all into this one kind of conference room that's on our floor. And it's just a bunch of yelling and get in, push up, do this, do that, right? And all of our upperclassmen, the cadre, are running around instructing, and they'll pick on one or two people and kind of get on them, and so we're down in like a push-up position, and one of the upperclassmen kind of starts to run by me, and his boot gets my jaw so hard it leaves like polish on it, right? And I'm there, and all of a sudden someone realizes it, and so they get down on the floor like, "Glassroot, are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." Right? "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir." And then they come, they're like, "Glassroot, get up." So they get me up, they walk me out of the room we're in, close the door, and they're like, "Glassroot, seriously, are you okay? I want to make sure you're okay. I just kicked you." And suddenly they were like friends instead of superiors. I said, "No, sir, I'm fine. I'm fine." Like, "Well, just take a deep breath." I'm like, "Okay." And then we go back in and resume yelling and push-ups and all of those things. But still one of my favorite memories because, yes, they're yelling and screaming and physical exercise or labor or whatever you want to call it. But obviously they're good people, and they still genuinely want to make sure they're treating you well within those constraints. So anyway, just a really funny story, and of course something that I shared then with my fellow freshmen. Just, "Hey, so-and-so wasn't so bad. He actually was kind of nice when I stepped out of the room." So
I'm sure they couldn't believe it, too.
No. Well, and the ones that were around me, too, saw it happen. So they're like, "Oh, my gosh, they kicked you." I was like, "It was not on purpose." They, of course, wanted to make it out to be like something intentional. And it just was, a tight space with a lot of hands and arms and feet. So it was entertaining to look back on.
Yeah, that's a pretty funny story. Then, obviously, you kind of mentioned your stay there was kind of brief. You eventually made your way to Carleton, I believe, after just the 1 year. Mm-hmm. What kind of made you, I guess, make the decision to go back to Minnesota? Was it just being maybe a little closer to home, or was it just you decided you didn't want to be a pilot anymore? Or? Yeah,
so, yes. Part of it was when, so I thought I wanted to be a pilot, as you said, and they go through a series of testing, and in that they found that I have a slight heart murmur. Nothing that affects anything in my day-to-day life, but not so much that they're going to put me in charge of a $1 billion jet one day, not knowing what it could do. So when I learned that, as I said, I didn't go into this thinking, I want to be a career military person by any means. It just was kind of intriguing, the idea of the basketball and the flying planes, and then combined with my injuries, I wasn't playing basketball. So I wasn't in the best, realistically looking back, I wasn't in the best mindset that I was like, is this really what I want to do? So I ended up leaving. As I mentioned earlier, Carleton, I have one of my older sisters, closest in age to me. She had attended Carleton, played volleyball and basketball there. It's an extremely good private liberal arts school. And so it was familiar. I knew the coach well, because of my sister there, and knew, so reached out, and she was very interested in having me join the team. And so it was really, I don't even remember if I applied anywhere else after that. I think it was just hey, if I can be accepted there, that's where I wanted to be.
Was it, you must be close with your sister then to just, you just wanted to play with your sister?
No, she was graduated by then.
Okay.
So I am 9 years younger than my oldest sister and 5 years younger than the closest sister. I was a double oops. I believe my sister who went to Carleton was an oops, and then I was the second one. But their best mistake ever.
Yeah.
So.
But she had the same coach, so the coach transferred from her to when you were there as well.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly the timing of it, whether there was maybe a year crossover. I think she was an assistant coach maybe at the time. But again, a small enough community that we were all connected and familiar.
Sure. And was it Tammy at that point that was the coach?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
You also played a little bit of volleyball at Carleton too, but that wasn't until your second year, right?
Correct. So at first year, I just focused on basketball. Again, that was my passion. And then my I think it was my second year, they had a new coach who actually, coincidentally, was an idol of mine growing up. She played at Mabel Canton, which was just 10 miles down the road, another small school. Heidi Lumen was her maiden name. She played at Oklahoma volleyball, and it was just a stud. She played volleyball, basketball, softball. She got the head volleyball coaching job at Carleton and was looking to rebuild the program, and really just was looking for numbers. I played and could kind of fill a void for them. So really, I played in the back row. I was a backup setter, but not a primary. Really just, again, kind of like my role in high school as well, just a really good, solid player that wasn't going to stand out in any way, but also didn't hurt the team in any huge ways. And by my second year, I had a handle on the academic stresses and workload, and felt like I could commit to that.
Yeah, and then obviously you played basketball the first year, and then you played 3 years of basketball there. Does that sound right?
That sounds about right. Again, as I referenced earlier, my ankles were just not my friends ever.
Sure.
And throughout, I think, all of the sprains and eventually I had some bone spurs in both of my ankles and ended up having surgery. And your body starts to wear and tear on you, and I wasn't able to do the things that I used to be able to do. And so at one point I finally decided, I'm not enjoying playing it as much as I used to because I just wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. But Tammy Metcalf-Filzen was an amazing coach, and I was like, well, I still want to be a part of the team. I can't just step away from that. And so she, allowed me to be a student assistant with her. And that's, I guess, really where I started to think about the possibility of college athletics as a profession and a career. I don't know prior to that what I thought I was going to do. I came into Carleton thinking maybe I'm going to be a political science major and be a lawyer, and then realized I don't want to be a lawyer. Ended up getting a women and gender studies major. And again, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
But then just really took a love for the coaching side of things because I had such a great mentor in Tammy. And looking back, my father too, he had a perfect balance of coaching, teaching, being compassionate, keeping it fun. And I think Tammy, the same thing. She never had to raise her voice at us. It was us wanting to do it for her because she was a mother-like figure for us. And again, we had a great success at Carleton. And to be honest, one of my favorite memories at my time during Carleton was during one of our playoff NCAA playoff games, and we hosted, I believe it was, we're getting down to the gym a couple hours ahead of time. The doors open maybe an hour ahead of time. There's a line out the door, down the sidewalk, quarter mile, maybe a half mile long of people waiting because it's a small D3 gym, waiting because they wanted to be in the gym for that game. And so, again, looking back, I feel really fortunate. I had great support as a female athlete in high school, great support because of our success. We were doing well and people wanted to watch. But we had packed gyms, and I know there's a lot of females that can't always say that, and I'm fortunate to say, yeah, we packed the gym.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned some of that success. You won 2 MIAC titles and made it to 2 NCAA tournaments. What was that kind of experience like to be able to travel, especially for the NCAA tournaments?
Well, our first year making the tournament was exciting because we had never been done before. And again, it wasn't, we weren't picked to win it. We had struggled at times, and I can't remember what our record, we had 5 or 6 maybe losses. It's not like we went 24-1 or something like that. And so when we had won the conference championship, we had that automatic berth, which was really exciting. And then we learned that we were going to play, I believe it was Nebraska Wesleyan, which we couldn't care who we were playing. The downside is that we realized Nebraska Wesleyan from Northfield was just inside of the 500-mile mark, or 300, whatever that was. So instead of flying, we had to drive. But again, sometimes the bus rides and the trips like that are the best parts of the best memories. And so we went down. We unfortunately did not perform very well. It was their crowd was tough. I don't want to say hostile. It wasn't hostile, but it was a challenging environment to play in. I remember at one point one of my teammates, whose father was the men's basketball coach at Carleton, she's a super passionate, animated teammate, and she said something on the bench, and they thought our coach had said it, so they teed her up. But it was ultimately one of my teammates, and we don't ever let her live that down, because she just, and I think she was a freshman that year. She was so embarrassed that she had caused our team to get a technical. It was not the changing factor in the game by any means, but and then the next couple of years we had the opportunity to host conference championships and host the NCAA's. I can't remember, I think maybe twice. So again, just because we lived in a really supportive community, it was a lot of fun.
And then from there, you eventually made your way to Worcester Polytechnic Institute for your first full-time, or maybe even not full-time, but your first coaching job. What was that experience like? What kind of drew you into that school specifically?
I'll be honest, I threw my name in for any athletic-related job. Obviously, coaching was my priority, but I knew at that point I just wanted to get into college athletics, so I applied for some compliance jobs. I applied for, not athletic training. I wasn't qualified for that, but anything I felt like I was potentially qualified to do, in addition to coaching, I did, and with very little success, to be honest. I was looking to get to the East Coast, so mainly because you could apply to so many more institutions in such a small space, and I had some family out there and a friend out there, and so to be honest, the Worcester Polytech, or as they would say, Worcester Polytech job opened up. I put my application in, and to be honest, that was very close to a friend that I knew out there, and so I was really interested in it, and I was going to be visiting, and it was I want to say it might have been late July that this was happening, so school year is getting pretty close, and I was going to be in the area, so I had already submitted my materials. I reached out and said, hey, I'm going to be in town, I would love to meet with you, I'm really interested in this job. And so the head coach, Cherise Galasso, who's still a very, very good friend of mine, she really, outside of my own head coach, she gave me the opportunity to get started in this. And she was just recently inducted to the Hall of Fame at Worcester Polytech, so congratulations to her. But she agreed to meet with me. And then looking back, realized that she's like, I never would have called you or thought of you, because I'm like, you're in Minnesota, why are you going to come all the way out here for a job that pays $15,000 a year? It was a full-time job, it was benefited, but it was $15,000, and why would you move halfway across the country for a job that doesn't pay very good? But when she learned that I had a connection, or that wanted to be, I genuinely was willing to move. We went through the process of, it really was just an interview that day, and by I think the start of school, which is maybe August 23rd, 24th, 25th, somewhere around there, I was on campus, and I was in an apartment, and I was a college basketball coach, so it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and then obviously you were there for a couple of years. What was it, I guess initially, what was it like to transition from, being a small town Minnesota person to big city East Coast? Yeah,
it's funny, I didn't think about this till just now, but having moved to Worcester, which is about 45 minutes from Boston, during one of my summers when I was at Carleton, I had gotten connected to work on Martha's Vineyard, which is just off the coast of, outside of Boston, and worked for a family, but also worked at an ice cream shop. Had the unique pleasure of meeting President Clinton. Stopped at Mad Martha's, which is an infamous ice cream shop in Mad Martha's. and Chelsea was along. I can't remember how old she was at the time, but so I had spent some time in Boston because I had done a couple trips in and realized that Boston, despite being a major city, has a small town feel about it when you're walking around. And so I just had familiarity with that region. Again, I had some family in Connecticut, and to be honest, and my family will say this too, I've always just been interested in like exploring, doing something new. My older siblings never really left Minnesota, and I went to Colorado, came back, and then went to the East Coast. So got somewhat off track there, but yeah, I getting out to Worcester. Again, because I think I'd spent some time on the East Coast a little bit, it wasn't too daunting. And again, back my boss, Cherise Galasso, she's like a big sister to me. To be honest, her birthday is one day away from my oldest sister. So she took me under her wing. I wasn't making a lot of money, and I was trying to pay off student loans. So she, would treat me to lunch and dinner. She'd invite me over. We would, on game days, she had this silly tradition of like going shopping to like occupy herself until the game, because on game days, everything everything's pretty much ready, right? Or it should be. And so she and I would go shopping, and she would buy a new outfit for the game or something, and she would treat me to a suit or to a shirt or something. So it was a really great situation considering I didn't have my own support network. She became like family to me, and still is. And again, we had some great success. I think looking back, I actually was the first. This was a new full-time position for her as well, so I was the first person to be in a full-time position with her as an assistant. So she was an assistant AD, and so it allowed her to do some of those responsibilities, and I really got my hands in everything. I was I was our strength coach, I was our academic advisor, I was our recruiting coordinator, I was a counselor, I was whatever they needed to be, I did it.
Sure, and then you kind of mentioned that being maybe a little more of a small town feel. You then went to Manhattan. That's not so much a small town feel.
It is not. And that's really where, I referenced earlier, kind of growing up in a small town, when I would recruit, again, I was at two different institutions that were in the New York City area, and I would, I'm trying to convince families to send their daughters, 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old daughters, to come to New York City. And I would always kind of reference my background. I said, I grew up in a town without a stoplight. And now I live in a city that there's a stoplight, every 500 feet or something like that. But it just was natural. Again, my transition from Massachusetts to New York, I had met my now husband. So we were dating, and he was coaching at NYU. And we just wanted to be a little bit closer, and so I was looking for jobs. And again, my boss knew Mindy Hill, who was at Manhattan College. And it's kind of the story of my career. I feel like I had really great female leaders that wanted to see me advance, even though it meant me leaving them. They were the ones to recommend or put in a good word or say, oh, I have a friend who's looking for someone. And it was kind of that next step. So I went to Manhattan, and I was, a position coach for our guards. I was, I think I had academic over. No, that was Karen. Can't remember my other responsibility there. And then that led to my time at LIU in Brooklyn, and there I got the recruiting coordinator position, which is the natural step up. And again, had the great pleasure of working with Gail Striegler. So just really fortunate to have some amazing women that helped me along the way.
Yeah, and obviously having that Division I experience kind of gave you probably a little bit different perspective too. And then you had some success at Long Island too. You went to a conference championship game. Mm-hmm. What was that experience like?
Just surreal. I mean, it again, I never saw myself getting into the Division I side of things, but was intrigued by it. And so, yes, the fact that I got to Manhattan was the first stop. then making it making to LIU, and Gail was a new coach there. She was originally from the South, but they convinced her to come up to the North. Winters were a bear for her, and I helped her through that. But we had some really great athletes. We inherited a program that had some success, but then brought in some good pieces as well, and had this Ashley Palmer was a freshman. Was it my first year, and had the most unorthodox shot. It was like a two-handed from behind her head. She's from Pennsylvania. Can't remember exactly where. Most unorthodox shot, but it went in. That's one of the, as coaches, you teach form, but at some point, no one really corrected along the way. She figured out a way it had this side spin on it, but she was just a beast. She was strong, and so if she could shoot the three, but if someone came out, she had a quick first step, and she would just bowl through you, right, like a bull in a china shot. She just was strong as heck. She would rebound, and she was really, throughout her time there. I have to go back and look at the stats. I'm pretty sure she sits in some pretty good positions in the record books. But she was a big piece. And again, because of Gail, my head coach's upbringing, we recruited out of the South. We got some kids out of the Atlanta area, Florida. We had a great post out of Florida, and just found a way to get them all working together. And again, the NEC conference is a fun, competitive conference. Some long bus trips because it's just far enough that maybe wasn't worth the flight. And again, it's a low Division I. The finances aren't what they are at the Big Five, but just had a great experience there.
Sure. And when did it kind of start to hit you that you eventually wanted to be a head coach? Was that while you were at Long Island, or was that more earlier on and you were just kind of trying to take steps towards that point?
That's a really good question. I don't remember a point where this is what I want to do. I just, I got into coaching and loved it, and just kind of followed where it took me. Yeah, I would say probably, getting to Long Island, being the recruiting coordinator, getting a little better insight into all the pieces and the depth of what you needed to do as a head coach. And wasn't, again, any of my, with the exception of my first coaching job, I was actively pursuing. The next jobs all kind of came to me, including the Carleton one. Obviously, I was happy. We were finding success. I had only been at LIU for 2 years. But my coach had decided to retire, Tammy. And the athletic director, who was the athletic director when I was there, and had a long-time athletic director, Leanne Lunder, had reached out to say, hey, would you be interested in this? And again, Carleton is a school where they love their alumni, like almost every other school. And there aren't a lot of Carleton alumni that are coaching, right? They are politicians, they're doctors, they're lawyers. I took the path less traveled than a lot of Carleton alumni. So he reached out and asked if I was interested, and so then I sat down with I'm trying to remember if we were my husband. Yeah, I think at that point we were married. So I sat down with my husband and talked about, okay, is this, what do we think? At that point he had been in New York for I think 7 years, and we both loved our time in New York, loved the culture and the food, and I loved the subway and public transportation, all of those things. But we also, neither of us grew up there. He grew up in Tampa, Florida. I grew up in small town Minnesota. We were open to the idea, and in that time he had left coaching and got into some a different line of work, and so we were open to the idea of getting out of the hustle and bustle of New York. Carleton, a great institution, very familiar with it, and so it just seemed like a natural opportunity. Again, probably a year or two earlier than maybe I would have been pursuing it. But we decided to take the chance and go through the process and see what happened.
Yeah, and then you were there for almost another 10 years, what was, I guess first off, what were the main differences in stepping up to be a head coach compared to being an assistant?
Oh boy, lots. They always say a lot changes in that, 15 inches left or right when you move. I think the hardest thing for me, realistically, was as an assistant, I was a really well liked by our players. You're the good guy more times than not, and that was a big challenge for me. Was players not liking me for one reason or another. Not all of them. There obviously I had plenty that did, but that was an adjustment. And again, just the level of planning and preparation. So. And really, when I took over that program, we didn't have a full-time assistant, and so really everything fell on me. So I go back to my WPI days, where I was doing everything. I was the head coach, but I was also the recruiting coordinator. I was the strength coach. I was in at that institution we're faculty, so we teach classes, physical education classes, because it's a requirement for graduation. So I was teaching. I inherited conveniently a volleyball class, which was great because I played volleyball, and an introductory weight training class designed for women, which again, with my women and gender studies background, that ended up being one of my favorite things about my time there. Outside of basketball, obviously I loved my coaching basketball and the experiences we had, but that class, the students that signed up for that class probably were not student athletes, didn't play a sport in high school, probably didn't even like gym class in high school. We're talking about a lot of nerds, right, myself included. We're book smart people at the institution, so they're just fulfilling a requirement. But they had a genuine interest on hey, I want to do these things. I'm kind of intimidated by all these people who know what they're doing, and so I was introducing barbells and dumbbells and machines and trying to figure out what kind of workout they might like, trying to help them realize that you don't let's figure out what you like. If you like it, then you're going to do it more, and then you're going to have a healthy lifestyle. So that ended up being something that, while it was an add-on, I came for the coaching gig. I really enjoyed teaching and just trying to kind of empower some of the women on campus.
Sure. And then obviously, after a decade, that's a long time to be a head coach, especially at one institution. What kind of, I guess, made you realize, hey, it's time to maybe look into doing something else?
Yeah, so when I was hired, I had never made time to get my master's. Well, that was a contingency piece. That when I was hired, I have to complete my master's because our head coaches are faculty members. So I worked on, and coaching doesn't necessarily work well with pursuing education while you're working, because it's nights and weekends, and so is getting your master's. But that kind of forced my hand, which I was really happy about. So worked on getting my my master's in educational leadership with an emphasis in higher education. As my final component of that program, I put together, it was to put together something that could kind of help your institution, right? And there was a need, I could tell, and kind of a want for some leadership training. As coaches, we're always talking about, how can our captains and our leaders be better and different, and so I put together a plan that we would create a program for not just my captains, but for captains across all of our sports. And so then I took that and implemented it. I talked to my athletic director, Gerald Young, who was exceptionally supportive. He gave me the okay to really put this together, and then what started out as just a leadership program to get all of our captains together grew to a real program where it had a development piece to it, and so I don't know, for probably 6 years it was a work in progress, and it was just me working on it, so it was slow because again it was an add-on. It was just something I did, and then as I was doing that, I realized there was another need, and actually I attended the NCAA Inclusion Forum, which was recommended by my athletic director. He and our SWA couldn't have attended it in the past, said, hey, would you like to go to this? And so he sent me, I think it was in Providence, Rhode Island. It was my first real experience where I was there purely as an administrator. I didn't have a title as an administrator, but I was starting to do some of that work. And so then came back with all these great ideas on ways that we can try to work on diversity, equity, inclusion at Carleton. So created a student group that was focused on that and geared towards trying to just increase discussions within athletics in particular in those areas. So I think it was those two things, and again, the unwavering support of my current administrators. And again, they're looking at it, well, someone's doing it, and we don't have the money to hire someone to do this stuff. That I found myself really satisfied when I would put together a program and get the positive response and feedback from student athletes and coaches. And again, the support of my fellow coaches, knowing that I was going to be interacting with their students. Some can, it could be a little uneasy to say, well, that's not, maybe is she going to tell them something I don't believe? Well, it was very cautious on how I approached everything, and that we're not telling them how to be leaders for your team. We're actually encouraging ways for them to communicate with you more. And so those experiences were positive. And so then I got connected with an organization called Women Leaders in College Sports, and attended applied for a symposium they have, which is really for introductory positions. It was a 3-day, we were in Kansas City for 3 days. I was the oldest by about 10 years. Most of them were in their early 20s, just getting into college athletics. I had been working in athletics a long time, just as a coach. And that really reignited my desire to get into administration. And so then that next couple of years, really 2 years, really focused on what I was doing. I was working with my athletic director. What else can I do? What other areas should I start to work in? He was really supportive. And then I was at another program through Women Leaders. I was in Denver, and had gotten an email from a search firm that said, hey, I see you're attending this, but you're a coach. Are you looking to get into administration? I may have an opportunity for you. Kind of the theme of my career. I'm not always looking for it at the time, but it came to me. And I said yes. And so had exchanged a few emails, wanted to set up a time to talk, which was right smack dab in the middle of the conference I was at. So during my dinner time one night, I jumped on a Zoom with Joel Lucan, our current athletic director, and the search firm, and had my Zoom interview, and was convinced I bombed it. I'm not gonna lie, convinced I bombed it. I went back, I was done. I went down to the cafeteria quickly. Hey, is there any food left? People knew I was having this interview, because obviously everyone there is trying to advance in their careers. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure I'm not getting a call back. It just didn't feel, I just don't feel confident in how I answered things. But it was a great experience, right? Like, every experience is a good one, even if it's not great. And completed the programming there and went back. And surprisingly enough, I think a couple weeks later, I'd gotten the call like, hey, do you want to come to campus? So that's, again, I was contemplating the administrative move that year in the spring of 2019. I had applied to a couple other jobs, had a couple phone calls, but never amounted to any on-campus interviews. But again, I give a lot to my athletic director, again, Gerald Young. Women Leaders has been amazing, because they have just helped me grow, provides educational opportunities to better figure out where I feel like I would be a great fit.
Sure, and you kind of mentioned some of the stuff that, a lot of that stuff does kind of translate into what you're doing now as the SWA here. And just, obviously not everyone knows what an internal operation person does, so could you just maybe explain that to the audience?
Yeah, it's really a mixed bag. I think one of my biggest, and when I interviewed, this came across very strongly, is is game day operations. So that could be anything from hiring student staff, adult, staff from the community, organizing halftime entertainment, coordinating with the visiting teams, coordinating with the officials, setting the gym up, right? And a little bit of everything, which Josh also assists with. So it's definitely a team effort when it comes to that. And then there's sports supervision. So, I have direct sport oversight with a few of our programs, but then really just being a go-to for all of our coaches. I'm a coach for the coaches. And so when they have something that comes up, I try to be a resource for them. I'm a liaison for our athletic programs to everywhere else on campus. So student life and academics falls with Seth Nichols, our director of compliance, but really just a liaison so that when problems arise, I can try to either connect them to the right person or try to find a solution, find the right person. I'm a liaison to the RMAC, and so as they have programming that they want to share with their student athletes or coaches, I'm trying to do that. I'm a resource for them when they're trying to get information specific to South Dakota Mines. And then other duties as assigned or needed. And so again, it's what I'm learning is I really love the interaction with student athletes, and I think that's in my transition to administration why I don't miss it, is because I'm at a small enough school where I still have all that interaction. I'm at all of our home events. 95% of our home events I'm at, and so I get to know the student athletes. And then when there's a need, I have stepped up in those areas, in particular just kind of student athlete development. That's an area we just don't have staffing for, but it's an area of great need, especially over the course of the last 3 years with COVID and social discourse and all of that. So, and mental health. Trying to help our students figure out ways that they can make an impact here on campus. I serve as an advisor, formal or informal advisors to our students that want to kind of organize in some way. And so I've been an advisor for our Hard Rocker Ally Association, and the amazing work that they do. And I say that like they do the work. I'm just a resource for them to help them if they need it. But they've really connected our athletic department with the Rapid City Police Department. So now I have a much more close relationship to them because of the Ally Association. We've have a group of students that are passionate about trying to do some things with mental health. And we started last fall. It fizzled a little bit. We're going to try to reignite that again. So that was a long answer to what my job is, but it just kind of is trying to fill the voids and solve problems when they come up.
Sure. Well, you kind of mentioned a little bit of the transition, but obviously early on you had to start learning a new position and then get hit with COVID. So what was that kind of like? Because I guess that would have been your second year here.
My first. It was
year.
my first.
Okay.
So I started in August of 19. I was here for about a month by myself. My son and husband were still in Minnesota. They joined in September. For those that know, Hard Rocker Athletics, fall is a busy time with football and volleyball and soccer and cross country, and basketball seasons, starting up as the end of the fall seasons are finishing. So it was a sprint. The first 6 months were a sprint. And I had to just jump in and take what was left from my predecessor, Tiffany McCampbell, who has left some really big shoes for me to fill, but has been a great resource. I still communicate with her and reach out and say, hey, when you did this, what can you tell me? Especially those first 6 months. And but got through it and felt like, okay, I have a good understanding of what my job is now, right? We get into the winter, we get through the basketball season, and we get to spring break, right? And I'm like, okay, I can breathe, right? Everything I had been doing up until that point was kind of last minute, right? Who's halftime? Who's this? Where are we getting workers? How are we doing this? And I was like, oh, I can't wait for the spring. One of the most exciting parts when I took this job was we don't have a lot of spring sports. We don't have the baseballs and softballs and lacrosse and tennis, all those games that get rescheduled because we're in the north. We've got golf and we've got track and field, both sports that you don't host every weekend. So I was looking forward to using that spring to, I know what my job is, and now I can plan ahead. I am a very type A. I like to plan and be organized. So I was excited to be able to do that. He had even had a meeting or two, I think, prior to spring break, to start planning for the football season, which is kind of our more involved, in-depth planning for our sports. And then, spring break hits, and we all know what happened then. We didn't come back to campus. And so now it's COVID, and it's like I'm in a new job all over again, because I'm home with my 5-year-old at the time. My husband, who typically travels a ton, is home. We've never been, in our entire relationship, had never spent this much time together, because one of us had always been traveling or recruiting or things. So yeah, it was, it's almost like learning my job all over again in a different way, because now there were different needs. We weren't hosting games and we weren't having fans, and so now it was, and I think that's really where some of the student athlete development had come in, that, there's a need. I have different expectations right now. I have a little bit more time because I'm not doing some of these other things. So how can I help? And thankfully the students kind of took it and ran. And so now that I'm back to what I was doing that first 6 months of my job, our student athletes are carrying the weight of a lot of that work, but I'm still very much connected and supporting them.
Sure. When you're kind of getting back to your normal duties, what was that kind of like? Obviously going through COVID was hard for everybody. And then what was it kind of like to have to, all of a sudden you're at home all the time, and then now you're back in the office and trying to, now I have to remember what I was doing before the world completely changed.
Yeah. Well, and really, so my second year was, again, a lot of COVID, very different. And then this last year, so my third year, it was relearning again. Like, how did we do this again? How did we do that? But again, I had gone through a normal, quotations, fall, so that it wasn't too bad. It really wasn't until this spring that I realized I haven't had a normal spring. And so there were still some firsts. So I'm in my third year here. There's still a few firsts that I never got to experience, because my first spring, we were home with COVID. My second spring, soccer and volleyball had been moved to the spring. So instead of having a quieter, planning, focused spring and just other things that would typically happen, didn't. And so this is the first spring where I still had some firsts, which is kind of crazy to think about when I've been here 3 years now. Yeah.
Outside of, being at work every day, doing, leadership stuff, organization, what do you do when you're not working? How do you kind of balance that life balance that so many athletics really don't have?
One, I make time. I thankfully, ever since I finished competing in college, I kind of got into running. I've always found a way to stay active. So, I've kind of, for a long time, I was just a runner and not a fast runner. But, competed I ran a half marathon maybe 4 or 5 years ago with a friend down in Louisville. The week prior to the Kentucky Derby, they do a marathon and half marathon. So I went down there and ran it. As I've aged, my knees don't always like the running as much, so I'm trying to, now I vary that. So working out regularly, 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week, even if just 30 minutes, is a good balance for me. To be honest, my 6-year-old keeps me really busy. He is a riot, a character. He's got a variety of interests. COVID, we had a lot of time at home, and so he took to drawing, and he's finding little workout videos that he would do. He'd see me work out, so then he would like, Mom, I want to do my workouts. So we find funny kid video workouts. But but most recently, he's really, he's at a lot of our athletic contests, and Grubby is his favorite, and he's convinced he's going to be playing for Grubby's teams one day. But most recently, he has really taken to a liking to basketball, which me and my husband really love because we're both basketball players and former coaches, but very cautious not to push. And so one day he's like, Mom, I'm going to get my basketball uniform on. We're just going to go outside. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So he is my hobby, to be honest. It fills a lot of the time. He's an only child, so we are playmates for him a lot of times. But I'm also, and I've picked up golf. Again, I picked it up just before having my son Calvin. Then obviously took a hiatus for a few years because there's just not 4 hours in your day to golf when you have a young one like that. But now, again, with a great partnership that we have with Arrowhead, I get out there and I'll golf. My son too will like golfing. My husband loves golfing, so that's kind of a nice new family time that now that our son is old enough, he's enjoying and we can enjoy together. And again, I just love fresh air, so it's good to get outside and breathe the fresh air in.
All right, that just about wraps us up. Unless you had anything else, any other comments?
No, it's been a wild 3 years, but a really great experience. I love what I do. We're really fortunate. As I look back at my career, I've been at a lot of high academic institutions like South Dakota Mines, and feel that that's my niche when it comes down to it. There are challenges, and a lot of people would not want a job at a school like this. But I just find great joy in working with those student athletes and knowing that, they're still able to play the sports that they love, but they are really focused and passionate about what their futures have beyond that. Knowing that they can put all this work in, and it doesn't mean they're going to be in the NBA or the NFL or MLB or any of those, WNBA. They can still do it, be committed to it, and knowing that there's an end eventually for most of us, but really just a great experience, and looking forward to what the next year will come with Hard Rock Athletics.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Hard Rocker Huddle. I'm Josh Van Valkenburg-Gernert, signing off.